In this episode, Rabbi Yosef, Kurtz, and I discuss An Apology from Your American Jewish Parents by David Magerman, a featured blog post in the Times of Israel. Hope you enjoy the conversation. David Magerman writes this featured blog on Times of Israel, right? And I'm going to run through, summarizing it, and I'm going to read one selection from it because I think it's just good to highlight. So the sort of premise or tone of the article is it's an apology letter to children of the diaspora, right? So children of Gullus, these are their parents, and he, as a representative, I guess, of the parents' generation, is apologizing to kids. He's saying that, when we had you, we imagined that you were going to go to Harvard and Wharton and you were going to be, the elite of American society. And to accomplish that.
Which, let me just interject, is so counter to Canadian culture. Nobody here aspires for Harvard and Wharton.
Well, it also reveals if this was a letter to any children, it was a letter to the children of his peers. Most kids are not, and he says, we sent you to the best preschools, the best summer camps. He says at one point we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on SAT tutors. There's a very small subset of the population that's spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on SAT tutors.
That's Manhattan.
Englewood, maybe some Scarsdale. There's wealthy communities out there, but this is not, emblematic of the Jewish community writ large. He's
Correct.
really speaking to the bubble that I think he either he exists in or I don't know anything about him, but presumably he exists in. So we did all this stuff. We invested all these things in you, and we were wrong, right? The world changed, or maybe the world was always this way, but the veil was lifted, and then now it's too late. And I want to read these two paragraphs because I think they summarize a lot. He says, like loving parents over the past 2 millennia, we prepared you for the realities of exile, living in the culture of our oppressors, trying to contort our Jewish observance so we could hide within the value systems and political structures of, quote unquote, the other, finding ways to be relevant, even essential to the societies where we were forced to live until we merit the redemption from Hashem. Even after the State of Israel was founded, its fragility and secular nature left us convinced that the path we saw for you when you were born was still the right one, meaning the Gullus path. Unfortunately, we were wrong. We became comfortable, and over the past 2 decades, we fell asleep at the wheel. We missed the signs, and we owe you an apology. Israel was winning war after war. Update, maybe not. Building up its economy, growing in Torah and mitzvot. At the same time, the West, especially America and Europe, was falling into an abyss of immorality and godlessness. Okay, so that's his charge. That's the apology, right? And he continues that we were lured into Judeo-Christian values over Torah Judaism. He says that we thought it was all about tikkun olam, and we embraced the trappings of our material success in Gullus. And this is all garbage. This was all a mistake. And his appeal to the children of the diaspora is to defy your parents, right? Now we want you to defy us, he says, right? It's time to see the Yad Hashem after October 7th in the world, to make financial sacrifices to leave America, right? That he says it's not so bad. You could go to Israel and live fine there. And I'll get into details there in a second because that's something I want to focus on. He says it's time to drop the sort of Greco-Roman Enlightenment culture. And he says Israel's awesome. There's free tuition. There's no pressure to go on Pesach programs. There's an abundance of affordable kosher food. And in Israel, you're naturally not going to be as materialistic as you are in America. And we prepared you for this world that no longer exists in America, and that's where we failed. And then he kind of does a dig at his peers. He says, many of us lack the courage, foresight, and humility to admit this truth to you that I'm admitting to you, that I have the courage, foresight, and humility to admit. So fight us, your parents, and move to Israel, right? Okay, so that's basically the message of the article. It's light on any concrete reasons or supporting evidence for the case he's making. It's in that sense, I don't think that's the tone of it. I think he wants to
mostly an emotional,
emotional appeal. Okay, so what do you think?
We live now, and many rabbinic figures are writing about this, but Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg just wrote an article about the Aliyah guilt that is coming out of Israel, and basically effectively saying that it doesn't work and it just pushes people further away from wanting to do that. I think that this is the tone of this is a little bit different because it's guilt coming from within. It's like, we have failed. Like, we should have moved to Israel, but we didn't. And, we built this amazing life for ourselves, but really it was a mistake.
Let's talk about this thing, because I've heard this now from parents, meaning our parents of high school students who have graduated and gone to Israel. I've heard two sentiments. One is sort of a benign, just observational note that there is much more pressure now from Israel programs, schools in Israel, that kids make Aliyah, go to the army. And one is a more resentful note, right? So there's been at least two parents who I've spoken to whose children have gone to the army who are very upset about it, who felt like the kids, in the same way maybe parents of our generation were upset when their kids flipped out and they felt sort of like hoodwinked into that. Like, this generation, at least these two parents I spoke to, and my understanding is it's more than this is more common sentiment, feel like their kids were sort of emotionally manipulated to join the army. And in both situations, the kids were having a tremendously hard time in the army. One kid did not get a combat profile and ended up in like a job in the army, and that can be miserable. If you get up with the wrong job, it could just be an absolutely miserable experience. And the other one was in combat and just was having a lot of mental health issues as a result. And these parents are like, I didn't sign up for this, right? Like he feels like there was sort of like a post-October 7th emotional manipulation on the part of these schools. And these are just these two parents' observations. And you have more insight into this than I do because you work directly with this. Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have seen that. The argument has been made to me that it exists in a bigger way than I believe it exists. I think that there are a few schools, a few yeshivas that create almost two classes of, I'm not even going to say of Talmidim, but of the pride that they feel with their Talmidim. Right. It's like, okay, this is a nice boy, came to yeshiva, went back to YU, he's doing okay. But these are the ones who got it. There's a few yeshivas that have that.
Stuff's always happened though. Like when we were in Israel, it was like often it was the kids who decided to switch to YU as opposed to going to Penn or some secular university.
But it's shifted from, he's in Rav Shechter's shir at YU to he's in Sayeret Golani.
Right.
That's shifted. And
do you think that this is like a manifestation of some conscious or unconscious guilt or resentment, better word, that people in Israel feel like I'm spending, in many cases in these yeshivot, it's the Rebbeim themselves or their kids, spending hundreds of days in Miluim, sacrificed so much. Living here has been just one trial after another since October 7th. And you fly in here, and you're going to fly out and you have all this privilege. And there's just some sense of like, you're not doing your part for Klal Yisrael. There's some resentfulness for that, or Am Yisrael. I don't know. What do you think?
Listen, I want to stop short of being critical of anyone else's journey, because I don't know what it is to walk in those shoes, to have sons who are getting injured and dying and seeing their friends die and going to Miluim, and these Rebbeim taking care of their grandkids and the Rebbeim themselves going into Miluim. So I don't know that experience, but I know this experience. And what I can say for certain is that you cannot look at a teenager who grows up in the 2020s and the 2010s in America and compare them to someone who grows up in Israel, or even compare them to our experience growing up in Canada and America in the 1980s and 1990s. It was a different reality. We don't live the same life. And so these teenagers that are flying at 17 years old and going to yeshiva and seminary and then being made to feel guilt-ridden, or, people are being critical of them. Like, how could you not join the army? How could you not feel that? How could you not feel that sense of achrayus? it's so foreign and different. It's so foreign and different for parents that grow up in Israel. I understand that nobody has an easy time sending their children off to war. Nobody wants that. But for people who have lived their whole lives and raised their children in America, it's a whole other level of discomfort and just foreignness that they don't see. So what I'd like to say is the good educators are the ones that understand that piece, that every kid is different, and we're educating children coming from America, and we can't treat them like Israeli teenagers, and we can't treat them like our own children. But I don't mean to say that the ones who, feel that the teenagers growing up in America should have that sense of achrayus are not good educators, because again, I don't walk through that experience of having to take that on myself. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was leaving to yeshiva, my father gave me, a couple pieces of advice when I was going to yeshiva. And one of them, it happened to be, I got to yeshiva, I think it was a week or two after the Hitnatkut from Gush Katif. And my father said, don't go to any protests. Do me a favor, don't go to any protests. And I said, why not? Like, I'm going to a religious Zionist yeshiva. This was like the time of protest.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah,
right?
Sure.
And he said, yeah, but until you decide that you're going to the army, how could you sit there and say that you have any opinion to weigh in on people putting their own lives at risk and their own children's lives at risk by defending Gush Katif? He said, I support you going to the army. You want to go to the army, good. But if you're going to come back and go to university in America, so how could you stand there and say, no, our soldiers must defend Gush Katif, our soldiers have to defend Gaza? You're asking someone else to put their life on the line when you're not willing to do it yourself. And we're a little bit going through different experiences. And I understand that there's many who make aliyah, and sometimes those are the ones who are the most critical. Like, I grew up like you. I didn't grow up in Israeli society, and I see the light now, and how could you not? But, every human experience is so different, and we all have our own tafkid in this world. And for someone to say that, I understand that, I grew up here and I was able to make it work, and I was able to, Israel is the land that is acquired through struggle and challenges. Okay, that's your experience, but, maybe that's not where I need to be right now in this moment in my life. I think it's naive and erroneous to say that our future as a nation is not in Israel. Like, it's clear. You open up a Chumash, of course.
So this brings us back to Mr. Magerman, right?
Yeah.
Like, so the thrust of his essay is, right, or letter, or whatever you want to call it, is, we all should move to Israel. I mean, that's really the thrust, right? Our kids should just move. We should go. We should fight for Israel. Life's amazing in Israel. And you're drawing a distinction here, right? You're saying, like, everyone should eventually end up in Israel, but it's not for us to decide when, how, who, where. Okay, so that sounds very pulpit rabbi-y, right? Like politician-y. Like let's dig into that a little. What does that actually mean?
Sure.
Right? Like, like, should you go or not? Like, because you could imagine someone in one of these Israel yeshiva seminaries saying, you're part of Am Yisrael. Like, I get it. You grew up in North America, but October 7th has revealed that Am Yisrael is in Am and across the world. And the center of gravity to that nation is in Israel. And we need people, right? We need, in the same way we might need Haredim in Israel, we need soldiers. We need people to fight for us. And so you don't get the luxury of shirking this responsibility. It's your responsibility as part of Am Yisrael.
Right. Yeah, and that's the sentiment that we're hearing from Israel. I'll just say,
Well, do you agree with that?
Yes, but I'm not living that life myself. So
you're a hypocrite.
Of course, yeah, I am a hypocrite. I'll just, I'll give you a small anecdote that just came up in my shul. So a few months ago, there were a number of attacks on different shuls in Toronto, and I have a friend, he lives...
What did someone call it? The polite intifada? It's like they shoot at night.
They shoot at night when no one's around. Yeah, the polite intifada. That's well said. So two shuls were shot at in the middle of the night, and thank God no one was hurt, no one was injured. But I have a friend, he lives, let's call it deep in the West Bank. He is a religious Zionist kanai, a close friend of mine. And he calls me up after and he's like, tell me that you didn't say some garbage drasha about how we need to come to shul and be stronger and show our pride and show them that we're not scared to be Jews. He's like, what did you say this Shabbos to your shul? I said, I said some garbage drasha about, that. Right. And then it happened to my shul, and we had an attack in the middle of the night, very polite man, and 3:30 in the morning, smashed our window. And the police have yet to determine if it's a hate crime, and et cetera. It might just be a random act of violence. Mischief.
In fairness to the guy, your shul is in a Shoppers Drug Mart.
Yes, which is what they said. And then I said, yes, but there's one sign with Hebrew letters and a Magen David, and that's right where the window was smashed. So okay, fine, we don't know. Let's leave it up to the police to investigate. I don't know. But I got up in shul and I said something along the lines of what you paraphrased my words a minute ago, that it's just a reminder that this isn't our forever. I know for sure that it's not our forever. So you asked me to answer the question, okay, so should we not just go now? I wish I had the conviction of my friend who lives in Israel, who knows 100%, he has emunah and the das to know 100% this is what Hashem wants from him and from Am Yisrael in this moment. And I don't have that, and I wish I had, and it's a lack of, perhaps a lack of faith, but let's just say a lack of certainty in knowing that, I don't know, history will tell. Perhaps it was on the right side and the wrong side, and I don't think anyone in Israel's on the wrong side ever. And we've just seen that through thousands of years of history. I wouldn't say that anyone's ever been on the wrong side of history, being in Israel and leading their life in the Jewish destiny there. There are times, the whole Gemara was created by people living in exile, and many amazing Jewish evolutions have come out of people living in exile. So I don't have the conviction enough to say that the diaspora should be shut down. I will say, as an educator, as a rabbi, I sometimes feel that my tafkid right now is here. And this is where I'm meant to be. This is where God wants me to be. So if you're asking on a personal level, should I be going to Israel today? I feel right now the answer to that is no. But I'm torn. I'm torn every day, and everyone knows that. I don't hide that fact that I'm torn. I desperately want that. I want my children to live somewhere with a life of meaning. I also know that life there is complicated, and raising children there is complicated. And sometimes to raise your children, there are, for some people, the decision is,
okay, but
I need to be here.
You're speaking from your perspective, right?
Yes.
So you're, I don't know how old you are, but let's say you're 35 or something, right?
A little older.
Okay, good. And you're, you've got a burgeoning career, and you've got a sort of a job with purpose and so on. And I'm in the same boat to a certain extent. So there's reasons you can point to that say what you're giving to the world, what you're giving to the Jewish people is here, and maybe you can't do that as effectively in Israel. But let's go back to our 18-year-old in Yeshiva in Israel. They haven't decided what they're giving to the world yet. They have the opportunity at this point to sort of set their course as an adult. Should they not feel obligated to go? Are the Israel schools right for pushing them into this situation? Let's take it from the perspective, to make the argument easier to make, let's take it from the perspective of the school does it responsibly, right? So the school doesn't take the kid who's going to have major mental health issues and push them to go. Although I would argue, I'm not sure it's so easy to spot that, right? Like, I'm not sure it's so easy to know who's going to have the mental health issues when they're in the army, or who's going to be challenged by that. Like, I'm not sure that anyone has the crystal ball, but let's just say the school does some diligence and it's careful about who it's pushing. Is it right to push? Is it right to take a kid at 18 years old, right, and sort of create a dynamic and an environment that says this is where you're obligated to be? This is where your responsibility to the Jewish people is right now.
So that can't be a yes or no answer. There's so many factors. Number one, are the parents supportive? If the parents are not supportive, should the yeshiva be pushing something that at an age where, okay, you could say, okay, but he's an adult, he's 18, he's out of the parents' house. If the parents are not supportive, that question becomes more complicated. I would say that the biggest factor today, actually, that I'm seeing for boys is, and maybe I'll get criticized for making this comment, but there's nothing that exists in Israel that is as good an environment today as YU is for a boy that really wants to be, or New York, because there's more than just YU. There's also Landers and there's Near East. But a boy who really wants to be involved in learning and education, that nothing exists in Israel. I know there's JCT, Machon Lev. I know there's JLIC at different universities.
You're talking about post-army, living in Israel, right?
And we're seeing that. We're seeing boys leaving.
Who went to the army.
And they had that sense of achrayus. Okay, I'm going to take achrayus for Klal Yisrael. I'm going to go to the army. And it's not forever. Remember the Torah says that someone who's scared gets exempted from the army. Like someone who is too, not every boy that we've graduated from our school is cut out to go to the army, and some of them have gone.
Okay, let's dig in on this, because this now goes back to Magerman. So Magerman makes the argument, right, that and he implies this in a bunch of different places, that the future of Judaism, right, the place that's best for your Yiddishkeit is going to be in Israel, right? And this presumes two things, right, that I think are questionable, at least. First thing it presumes is that Yiddishkeit is dead in America, right? That you can't really be, the plan of being, in his mind, going to the Ivy Leagues, graduating Harvard Law School, getting your MBA from Wharton, having this sort of elitist American dream lifestyle, that's dead, right? There's no future there. And all the future of engaging successfully in life is in Israel. So I'll challenge that on two fronts. First is it really dead in America? No. You can still go to Harvard, you can still go to Wharton. I get it. There's more anti-Semitism, overt anti-Semitism, but this is also where the Canadian experience comes in. My wife went to York how many years ago? 25 years ago, and there were Palestinian protests on campus during the Second Intifada.
I had to pass through a checkpoint when I went to York, and they would ask me to see my ID because that's what I did to their Palestinian brothers and sisters in Gaza. Right.
And in general, that's been the experience on Canadian universities for a long time. And I'm not sure that it rules out your ability to attend these universities, to succeed in the universities, to have any piece of the American dream. Your hundreds of thousands of dollars in SAT tutors, at least he hasn't explained why that was wasted. I think he presumes it. So I'm just focusing on the campus stuff, but he didn't really explain why that's wasted. And I'm just not sure it is. I don't see, we're in a weird moment where there's more overt anti-Semitism in the American sort of public conversation, whatever that means, than there's ever been. But Jews are also more powerful and influential than they've ever been. And that doesn't seem to be abating, right? Although maybe it will. Maybe this is just the canary in the coal mine, and it's all about to come crashing down. The other point is that going to Israel is so great for your Yiddishkeit. And I think that there's a strong argument to make that at least we should need to talk about that, right? Because let's talk about what it means. So you go to Israel as a modern Orthodox person, right? And you and I have discussed this. The overwhelming majority of modern Orthodox people we know who made Aliyah, some number of their children have decided not to be observant anymore. They're very committed to Am Yisrael. That they've gotten through the Aliyah experience, right? They're super committed to the Jewish people. These are and that's part of what the Israeli experience offers, that being dati, being Shomer Torah mitzvot, that is an option, essentially, because it is not tied to your connection to the Jewish people. Whereas in Chutz La'aretz, your entire connection to Jewish people is tied to your community. If your community is to Shomer Torah mitzvot, if you're not Shomer Torah mitzvot, you're excluding yourself from the people. Whereas in Israel, if you're not Shomer Torah mitzvot, it's kind of just a lifestyle choice. You really haven't excluded yourself from the people. And, in reality, you're seeing that, right? Like lots of mono-Orthodox people who move to Israel have some number of their children, whatever percentage it is. I don't know if anyone's done a study on this.
So
You're the study man.
No, I meant to do that. Someone I know is doing a study on this topic right now. He's not done yet. I'll let you know when he's done. But a friend of mine is doing a study on why seemingly the numbers spike, like children going off the derech or whatever
you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
So that's happening, but we all know that's
why
it's an
it's higher
observed
in
reality.
Israel.
And so the alternative to that is you become Haredi, right? So the Haredim have less people going off the derech, presumably. But the problem is, you become Haredi in Israel, and now it's not like here, if you decide to be yeshivish, where you still love Israel, and you still love Chayalim, and you still love, you have that Home Mishpacha magazine experience, right?
And
where
you
you're
can still work.
In the yeshiva world, you work in nursing home management or whatever, healthcare analytics, whatever you're doing, right? And you can earn a good living, right? And you love Israel, meaning you love the Olam HaTorah, and you love Das Torah, and you love all that stuff, but you also love Israel, and you love Chayalim, and you can live in that reality that doesn't actually exist in Israel because you're thousands of miles away, and it seems to work here. But if you become Haredi in Israel, now you're in a community that is politically opposed to supporting the state and the infrastructure of the state. So then that becomes complicated. So I'm not. It's just not clear to me. The two premises that Jewish life is over here and it is so much better in Israel. It's just not clear to me.
I do want to bring up I do want to bring up a counter argument, and not saying that I disagree with anything you said, because I think I agree with it. What Israel has that North America doesn't have is a very, very Torani Dati Leumi community, meaning that you could find a shul, community, city, yeshivas full of people who wear kippah sruga, who are going to go to the army, who take their davening seriously, who take their learning seriously, who want to sit and learn for many years, who are talmidei chachamim, who are, really, really halachic and serious about their Yiddishkeit. And that's hard to find in North America.
Well, but what would even be the corollary in North America? Meaning, you could find a lot of people who take their Yiddishkeit seriously, who work.
Give me a shul, like in North America, you have, if you walk into, and sadly, and we talked about this on another podcast, but you walk into a Haredi shul in North America, and then you walk into a young Israel, modern Orthodox shul in North America,
so
the talking is much higher.
Let me clarify. Yeah. So your argument effectively is, if you want to be Tzioni in America, and be serious about your Torah learning and halachic observance, there's no place for you. If you want to be serious about your halachic observance in America, you need to be in some sort of yeshivish community, because those are the only communities where people are going to take halachic observance very seriously, while also being engaged, let's say, in earning a living and whatever it is. Is that your argument?
Yes, and I'm not.
Meaning
I'm not meaning to say that there's no place for. Like, there are yechidim like that, but just look at night seder. How many shuls have night seder where you have people balabatim that work all day that are going to learn 2 hours at night. You go to a yeshivish, a kollel, a charedi. There's a lot. In our community, just here in Toronto, anecdotally, tried to open up a program like that. It didn't take off. The culture of learning Torah is not as serious in our modern Orthodox community. And in Israel, you could find communities of women who are very well learned, who take their learning very seriously. And so I understand the piece, and I agree fully that the number spike of children and community members who have decided not to make halacha a priority in their life, that goes up. But what also exists there is real powerful, strong Dati Leumi communities that are Torah focused.
So I like what you just said, but I want to reframe it, and I want to see if you agree with me. I actually think that it's all part of the same thing. I think because Israel has separated, living in Israel allows you to separate as a Jewish person your nationhood, right? Your belonging to the nation and your religious observance or your spiritual connection. by nature, you have much more variety of options, of spiritual, religious options in Israel, right? Because doesn't need to be as much external pressure to keep you involved. So it's like here, the problem of living in a diaspora community, a Gullus community, is if you want to be anything different than the community, right? You want to be a little bit different, and that, by the way, that applies both ways. It could be in a yeshivish community if you want to, not wear a black hat or read some Kfira books or whatever it is, or it could be in a modern Orthodox community if you flip out and you want to wear a black hat and you want to become from. It's very hard, right, to be in your community. Whereas in Israel, there's a much greater acceptance of, I'm going to have 5 kids and they're all going to be different places religiously because they're going to figure it out because their connection to Am Yisrael is grounded in the state and living there, and then there's many more options. So the beauty of Israel is that it provides all these different options for engagement, has many more people engaged in Torah learning, wearing many different hats, so to speak, or if you want to use the Jewish thing, many different head coverings, right? And way more than North America. But if you follow that through, inevitably that it's not a bug, but it's a feature. A feature of that system is going to be more people go off the derech. Because if you create the system that allows for all of this beautiful tapestry of difference, right, that has to include opting out, right? The reason you get less people opting out is because you create these pressures and you say you can't be any different and you can't look that way. And as soon as you look that way, you're already suspect and people are judging you and looking at you. So you feel all that pressure to stay in. Once you remove all that judgment, you say, kind of go do your thing and figure it out. Well, you have to accept that.
It's interesting
that's going to happen.
While that makes a lot of sense, I don't know that in my lived experience and what I've observed, it really holds true in Israel because and versus America, because in America there's so much more fluidity between communities and people in my shul that are modern Orthodox get along so well with the people down the street in a more yeshiva shul. It almost like it feels like there's no barriers between the communities. And then in Israel, it feels far more polarized that you have you live sometimes in a yeshuv or a moshav or a city, a community that's very one type. And even though there are people that are open-minded and liberal and say like, okay, go figure it out, I think there's a lot of people in a lot of communities in Israel who are very insular, and maybe it just turns people off that they want to see the world and they want to see they don't have to be the same type for everyone.
So would you say this could be true? Maybe, all right, that because I think you're right. Like in North America in general, the distinction between a from modern Orthodox person and a sort of moderate yeshivish person is almost non-existent, right? Like maybe you wear a black hat, maybe you don't. But in the end, you're working, you care about earning a living, care about
living almost
Torah.
The same life.
You're living almost the same life. And you're right. In Israel, you find yourself much more separated communally. But at the same time, it seems also true that in Israel, if your kids are not religious, they're still more part of your life. And they're more, and maybe it's just the calendar and the life cycles. Like they'll still come home for the chagim and for meals because everyone's off on the chagim, and it's still that naturally allows that. But maybe it's true that in the diaspora there's more movement between strands of orthodoxy. Within orthodoxy, there's more movement, but in Israel there's more flexibility from Orthodox to non-Orthodox.
It's interesting. I have a cousin who grew up Haredi in Israel in Sanhedria. His parents, like my aunt and uncle, were, I would say, yeshivish American, and then went to Israel and raised their children Haredi. So he grew up in the Haredi system, fully, insular, raised his children in Beitar. He's a little older than me. He's probably in his mid-40s, late 40s, I would say. And he moved from Beitar a couple of years ago to Ramat Beit Shemesh, which is a big, big move from, talk about distance between communities. And so I asked him why. And so he has a child who is no longer observant, youth at risk type that they call it or something.
Why did we stop? Did we stop calling it that?
Youth at risk, because it's so insulting.
That was like the word of our childhood. Like if you're at-risk youth. And
at risk meant like, you picked up your phone on Shabbos and you were like...
When we were kids, it was like, if you did drugs, like everyone who was off the derech was doing drugs, right? You can never go off the derech and not be a drug addict. That was like, you had those two hands together.
They hand it to you on your way out. On the way out of yeshiva.
Now weed's become legal. Everyone's just like, everyone's a drug addict. Let's move on.
So I asked my cousin, why are you moving? So he says, well, I have a child who's not religious. And I went to my Rosh Kollel and he advised me that I should move so my child always feels comfortable coming home, that he always has a place to come. I was so blown away. I love that. I was so impressed with this cousin who, by all measures is like, Haredi, insular, and like, as much as like, in Kollel in his whole life is Torah. But he just felt, okay, my child always has to have a place to come home. And now he's raising his children in a whole different community there, a whole different world. And it's, must have been a big shock for all their other children, but his child always has to have a place to come home to.
Right. I think also and again, I think the Haredi world in Israel is very different because they're protective of a different reality, right? Which you can see in the political arguments, right? Like they have sort of political points they want to make, in terms of how they relate to the state. So maybe they're not the best example, your cousin notwithstanding, but I think in Israel, when your kid goes off the derech, let's say in the modern Orthodox Tzionist community, when your kid stops observing Torah mitzvot, you don't feel the same rejection that you do if your kid stops observing Torah mitzvot in Chutz La'aretz. In Chutz La'aretz, you feel like my kid is rejecting Judaism. Whereas in Israel, you don't feel like my kid's rejecting Judaism. My kid's totally Jewish. My kid has a keen sense of their Jewish identity. They're willing to pick up a gun and fight for their Jewish identity and for the protection of their family and their people, right? So they're not rejecting Judaism. They're rejecting halacha. They're rejecting it. So there's more acceptance of that, even though within Orthodoxy in Israel, you have so many slices, but everyone kind of exists in their little slice. Although I think that might also be a moshav or yeshuv reality, right? Like if you
think it's a Haredi
if you live in Yerushalayim, like my brother-in-law lives on a yeshuv, and even though I would say like on that, the yeshuv has a very strong identity, even though a lot of the kids from the yeshuv are also choosing not to be religious, right? In various different ways. But the yeshuv itself still has a very strong sort of identity. But we lived in Yerushalayim when we were in Israel, and like Yerushalayim is cosmopolitan. It's much different. I mean, it's obviously Yerushalayim, so like every nut job in the world lives in the city. But like, but it has that like broader range of acceptance. Okay, let's move on to some other assumptions of the letter. Okay, so this one is fun, but I liked it. Is the abundance of cheap kosher food. That one stood out to me because there's nothing about kosher food in Israel that's cheap. And I want to extend it. There's really nothing about living in Israel that's cheap. Yeah. It is an expensive place to live and you make less money living there. So that is just, I think, intellectually dishonest to present Israel as like, it's so great you don't pay tuition. And there's a lot of the kosher culinary experience in Israel is amazing, right? In terms of the amount of amazing food you can get. But you go to a restaurant in Israel and check your credit card bill afterwards, it's not cheap.
Well, especially you're going to go this summer. In the last year, everything has gotten 33% more expensive because the dollar has gone down and the shekel's gone up. And this is as a tourist, but this is affecting Aliyah in a huge way that people aren't talking about enough yet. Because all the dollars you bring from America and Canada are worth so much less than they were. 4 million shekel apartment in Israel in Canadian dollars used to be $1.5 million. Now it's $2 million. That's like a huge chunk of change. You go grocery shopping, people that were just in Israel last week told me, and I had this experience in February.
It's not like you go to the grocery store. Everything is more expensive. Like it's really, really expensive to live there. And so I get you're not paying tuition, but you're also making a heck of a lot less money. So, and by the way, you're paying a ton in taxes. So like there's no free lunches. Like you're paying for tuition. Yeah. And if you send your kid to any sort of semi-private school, those prices have gone up too. It used to be like, it's like 6,000 shekel for the year. Now it's like 15,000, 20,000 shekel for the year to send your kids to the semi-private schools, which are significantly better than just the regular Israeli public school.
Are they that expensive now?
In like cities, yes. And like Yerushalayim, yeah, some of them can be that expensive.
My brother, I was talking to my brother. I don't remember what he said in terms of the price, but I think he sends to semi-private, and he was saying that it's still cheap. What I will say,
it's still cheap relative to what you're paying in the States, but again, it's all relative to what you're earning.
Well, what I will say is, his point about materialism being, it could be that
is a good point, actually.
You do need less there, and there's less pressure to have more. Let's say.
Okay, so because we experienced this in our, Aliyah and Yerida, right? So I agree. I actually agree that the just in general, like Israeli kids will have one pair of Shabbos shoes and one pair of sneakers, right? And like, it actually doesn't matter how much, like people who are super rich, their kids have the same thing. There isn't, certainly when it comes to things like dress, culturally, there's none of the pressures that you have here. So there are elements where materialism is less, but there's two pushbacks on that. Number one is, it's still hard for North Americans to adjust, right? And I will say the car thing is a big deal, right? So you can have one car in Israel, but then you still only have one car, and you got to do a lot of public transportation. And public transportation is public transportation. Like, if you live, there's good public transportation in a lot of cities. There's good public transportation in Toronto. Nobody uses it, right? Yeah. Like there's so that's an a mentality adjustment that can be hard. But I think the bigger point is, if you move to Israel and you may gain financially on some of these things, these materialism things, but you're going to want to fly back once a year and see your family in the States. So then you're dropping 10 grand easy every single year. So all of that just sort of goes out the window, right? If you are still connected to the state, like if you want to go to Israel and never come back and see your family again, right? Or you don't have, again, I'm assuming you don't have people, because the amount of people who make Aliyah who have some sort of basis of support is a lot, right? Yeah. But so that's not a fair comparison. But let's say someone who has no basis of support, like, I just don't see that as like, I think they're just,
that's true.
You just replace one financial pressure with another.
Yeah. And then there's people who just sacrifice and don't go home and don't get the chance to visit family. And that's what, I don't know if this still holds true, but the last Nefesh B'Nefesh presentation I heard, they said family is the number one reason they hear why Aliyah doesn't work, and that trumps finance. Finances is number two, but number one is lack of familial support.
Yeah, that was our story. That was definitely our story. Right? It's not like it was just also just being far away. It was hard. Like Racheli's brother lived far away in Israel, and the rest of her family was all here, and that was a challenge for us. And having a kid without family around is a challenge.
Yes.
Is it possible that what Magerman is really upset about in this article, and he doesn't know he's upset about, is that elitism is dying, right? That really what the letter he should be writing, right, is not, we made a mistake in telling you that Jewish life in America is great, right, versus Jewish life in Israel. But the real story he should be telling is, we made a mistake telling you that this elitist culture, that you're part of this elitist culture, when elitism is dying, right? Like, yeah, you can go to Harvard Law School and get your Harvard Law degree, and you can go to Wharton and get your MBA, but it's not clear that that's going to do for you what it did 30 years ago. Like, I think this generation of parents, especially, and this takes me back to my, KJ Ramaz days, right, of this world of like Ivy League, elitist, observant Jews, let's say, right? The narrative was always, we are giving you access to a world and a quality of life and wealth that that Jews just never had before. And I think that narrative is what's dying. First of all, I think you can earn a lot of money in a lot of different ways. And I think the yeshivish world is showing that, right? That you can be extremely wealthy without sort of
without an education,
without the elitist pedigree.
Yeah.
And I think, Donald Trump and sort of that whole revolution is a reflection of this reality that elitism is not what it used to be. And we may be in a sort of a larger cultural movement where elitism is being rejected writ large, and maybe going to Harvard. Like, does it help J.D. Vance that he went to Yale, like as a politician? I don't know. Did he go to Yale or Harvard? One of them he went to, right? Yeah. But I don't think it does.
Right.
Like, I don't think it's something he advertises. Whereas like Obama was like totally like Harvard Law School. Like that was like, I think we're just in a moment now where elitism is dying. And I'm wondering how much, and I'm over psychologizing a guy, I don't know, but I'm wondering how much of that is at play here, right? Is it really just like this elitist bargain of like, you're getting into the elitist world is no longer operative?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because that culture does not exist in Israel. Never has. There's,
army is the elitism.
Right,
That's the
correct.
That's the elitist
Correct.
institution.
Yes.
Is combat, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because aside from that, yes, Technion is considered a very good school, but
It's all the army.
Yeah,
It starts in
it's the army. It's the ones who fought in Duvdevan and
or were in
Shayetet
some elite intelligence,
elite intelligence,
Shmona Matayim or something like that. Yeah.
And that is true. And that's, much less based on book smarts and academic excellence, and that can be achieved by hard physical work. Like, you work out really hard, you push yourself to a limit, and strong will to push past that. And but that never existed. And in America, forget in the Jewish community, and maybe it's also dying in terms of, as you pointed out, but just in terms of how far it gets you. Like, I would say a college degree anywhere used to get you a lot further. An MBA from any school used to almost guarantee you a 6-figure salary. And today people...
And that's what you were saying before. That's also where Canadian Jews are a little different, because we've never
Right.
had that. There's never been like an elitist Canadian world. I mean, maybe in the non-Orthodox world, but like certainly among like our chavra, like there isn't this like...
I'm not that smart. I didn't try that hard. I got into U of T without even trying. Like
Right.
It wasn't... And U of T is, maybe the best school in the country. Like
U of T, by the way, our graduates go to U of T. Those are the only ones who come close to like the sense of self-righteousness and elitism that like I saw in Ramaz. That's our closest thing,
right.
U of T.
But because it's almost like it's a real school. Like you're going to have to actually... as opposed to York, where I chose to go because I just... Why would I go to U of T when York accepted a year of yeshiva credits? It just didn't... The payoff wasn't there. But to think about that, the application process was a click of a button. I took the easy way out in high school. I'm not an idiot, but I'm not a genius. And I was able to get into U of T again with not the best average, not the worst average. And so, in as opposed to in America, and I didn't get into the best program. Like you still have to work hard to get into Schulich, Rodman. I'm not taking away from that, but it doesn't exist like to get into Harvard and Yale and the Ivy League. Like from the time you're an infant, you gotta like be beefing up the resume and working hard.
Right. I also wonder, I have this like prediction for the future. Obviously I'm not the only person to predict that I think the 4-year liberal arts degree is going to die.
It should be dead, but it's not.
So I don't know about that. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if I agree that it should die. I think there will be consequences to it, to it dying. I talked about this a little with Sarah Zahavi on the podcast, but the common core, right, of sort of the Western canon, let's say, right, this is what, and by the way, Magerman just dismisses tikva out of hand when he's like, oh, we fell in love with the Judeo-Christian culture, right? But that idea, this like sort of what tikva is investing in, the argument that the way I would articulate that argument, and I'm curious if you agree now that you said that it's all a waste. The way I would articulate that argument is when we choose curriculum, right? There's two things that happen in education, and I think we don't talk about them separately enough. One is the intellectual cognitive skills that you are building through the process of education, right? And that's a battle in and of itself right now with how AI is interacting with students and the educational experience. But you can build good cognitive skills. In other words, think of Bloom's taxonomy, right? Like you could build good higher order thinking skills like analytics, evaluation, synthesis, application. You could build those skills on many different foundations, right? It doesn't have to be Shakespeare and algebra and biology, right? It could be a lot of different foundations. In fact, this is the old story. Oh, the guy learns in yeshiva and then takes his LSATs and gets a 180, right? In theory, that guy doesn't exist as commonly as people like to think, but that guy doing that, like learning Gemara and taking his LSATs, that's because he built these thinking skills off of Gemara as opposed to off of something else, right? So that part of education is important, and it actually doesn't matter so much what kind of content floor you're working off of, as long as you're building those skills. So then the argument comes, well, so how important is the curricular floor? How important is it that we study Shakespeare? How important is it that we learn algebra? How important is it that we do these things? And I think the argument that it's important is that these curricular models create a kind of common sense of society and purpose, right? And so we have a sense of what romance and love looks like because we read the same pieces of literature, right? And we have a sense of how a story should work because we've read stories that all have the same type of arc, right? And you see this linguistically between different cultures. Like Russian culture is very different than American culture because of the way their language works, because of the stories they read, because of what their kind of the underlying content of their education is. And to the extent that we lose connection with these kind of core educational principles of the West, we actually undermine the fabric of what keeps Western society together. It seemed the argument is a little immature, right? Like in the sense that, oh man, life got hard for Jews in the diaspora, and we were, the whole deal's off. The diaspora's finished. Let's all go to Israel. Life's really hard in Israel, too.
Yeah. And
life's gotten hard for Jews since October 7th in the world. And I'm just not sure the adjustment is diaspora Judaism's finished, everyone go to Israel. I think the adjustment is that Yossi Klein Halevi said this recently at something I heard him speak at, and I've had major issues with him, like generally over his support for, or his anti-judicial reform thing, although not pro-judicial reform, I just didn't love the way he went about it. But this point I thought was spot on. He said the post-Holocaust era ended on October 7th. And he said it was ending probably, like, you could argue, it ended in with the Second Intifada. I don't know, like there's a number, but like that was kind of the official end of the post-Holocaust era. Sort of this era where it wasn't okay to be anti-Semitic in polite company, and Jews sort of, if they wanted to be seduced by an illusion of being fully accepted into American society or Canadian society, they could say they were, and that ended. Okay, but the course of Jewish history is much more. What we're living through now is much more representative of what Jewish history has been for most of our history than what maybe we experienced in the 40, 50 years after the Holocaust. Let me even
say that it's much better than it's been for most of Jewish history.
Correct, because we've already achieved a tremendous amount.
I heard a stat that shocked me, that there were more hate. This was just in the newspaper last week. There were more hate crimes against Jews in Toronto. It was year over year, it was the largest number since 1980. And so I don't know that, what happened in 1980. I wasn't around, but I don't know that it's worse for diaspora Jews today than it's always been, even than it's always been since the Holocaust.
Let me ask you this question. How much has your life,
Yosef
little, Kurtz's life, changed? With all the shul shootings in Toronto, all of that stuff, how much has your day-to-day life changed?
Almost not at all. I would say very little. I live in a bubble. Yes, our window got smashed in shul last week.
In Shoppers Drug Mart.
In Shoppers Drug. I'm not taking away from the severity of that, but I will just say, that aside, that being the one incident, I live in a Jewish neighborhood. I shop at Jewish stores. I go to my Jewish school job and my Jewish shul job. And I honestly, I live in a pretty protected bubble. I think that, the experience may be different if you're, maybe if you started at York or Harvard in 2022 and have been there ever since till 2026. Okay. That experience might have changed after October 7th, where you might feel more animosity, more hatred. I don't, but I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I live in
but that's exactly my argument, is that it exists, and that's the adjustment we need to make, because frankly, it exists in Israel too, right? And it exists in a more, we need more gvura in general, right? Like the Jewish people don't need to run from their problems. And again, I don't have a take here on Israel versus not Israel. I genuinely don't know. Personally, I feel a connection to life in Israel that is infused with an energy that I don't feel here. But on the other hand, I feel like you, that here I am living out a kind of targeted, purposeful, professional existence in a way that I could not create for myself in Israel. So it's just there's a sort of a sadness in the sense that I can't have it all and I got to make my trade-offs. But like, to me, the idea that like, this is clearly over and like run away from this situation when, as we said before, I don't think that's actually the case in Metziut. Like, I don't think it's actually the situation, but also that really isn't the argument. I mean, the argument is for the next generation, for the letter to our children, is you have to grow up stronger, and you have to grow up in a world where you have enemies, and there are people who don't like you, and that you need to have resilience. And you will need that if you are living in Israel in one way, and you need the same thing if you're living in North America in another way. And that to me is the more profound message than just like pick up and leave because there's protests at Harvard.
I said in the beginning that the anti-Semitism, the discomfort that we feel, perhaps is just a reminder that this isn't forever, but there have been places where Jews lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. And our story in North America has been fairly, of course, there's a few, but for the most part, it's been the last 100 years. And it's been comfortable. And in some ways, life's more comfortable in North America for Jews than it's ever been. Even, like I said, like there are more minyanim, more kosher restaurants, more kosher food, more support, more gemachs, chesed organizations, and everything you can imagine, schools and shuls and yeshivas in America. So yes, there's a discomfort to remind us that we shouldn't ever think that anywhere is going to be great forever, because it hasn't been. But I also don't know, and again, I wish I had conviction 100%, but I also don't know that it's doomsday. We have to leave today, and we've failed you to think that you could have any form of a good, comfortable life in America, which I don't know is true. That was great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, talk to you later. Bye.
See ya.